Ruto's diplomacy. They call it diplomatic gaffes. He's been criticized highly since the first day he got into office. That even while he was still at Kasarani, immediately after taking over, his people had already tweeted something off. And they keep saying that these gaffes continue. Do you see that, especially after the meeting in Tanzania?
Yes.
Are you seeing more of this? Because in the headlines, the main investor in that refinery, Aliko Dangote, is now saying, actually, you should do this thing in Kenya. Yet it's our president who appeared even more keen to have it in Tanzania.
Fred, I mean, by now, every Kenyan knows who we are talking about. When you are referring to the president and what it is that his sentiments, I do not know whether there's a debrief that happens, which I doubt that there's a debrief that happens, because how else would you say that we are discussing to place a refinery in Tanga, whereas the owner of the money, the owner of the investment want to do it in Mombasa and you're sitting in a foreign country? I mean, this has been happening because nobody has accused our president of something he has not done. Let's start there. Everybody who have come up and said, hey, how did you do that? How did you say that? It is actually out of what he has said or done. So there's a lot of gaps out there because, this issue about oil and especially the positioning of that refinery is quite interesting because it is actually, there's something we've lacked as a country. It's called the continuity, building of what have already been done instead of going to the drawing board altogether. We've been losing a lot of investments and planning thereof. When President Kibaki came into power, he actually gave us something called Vision 2030. But in 2012, when President Ruto and President Uhuru came, they didn't take that very seriously because at that particular point, that particular department of Vision 2030 that Professor Mwakabati were headed was actually taken to the devolution department. They were taken out of what we call the Harambe House and they were taken to a devolution. And that's how it ended. That's how the whole committee was disbanded and everybody went their way. In that particular plan, we had something called the Rapset Corridor. The Rapset Corridor was actually an investment of 4 countries, that is Southern Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Kenya. That particular Rapset Corridor had an eventual refinery because the speculations of oil and discoveries have already been done in these countries. What have happened since that time? We've not been consistent at all in pursuing that particular dream and plan thereof. And I know there's a lot of money that is being poured and invested within what we call the Rapset Corridor, because Kenya has been doing it solo, but taking it where? Now, when we start talking about the refinery in Tanga, when we have our oil in Turkana, can you explain to me how our oil is going to get to Turkana? To Tanga. Realistically so, you better say things that make sense. When you are talking about something, let it make a lot of sense. We had Uganda diverting their pipeline out of Kenya through Tanzania. Are we following them there? A decision that negatively affected our future plans and strategic location and positioning, and we follow them to that particular direction. Why aren't we now sitting down with Southern Sudan, who have not yet done the refinery, Ethiopia thereof, and rediscuss or renegotiate what it is that they could have found that is not good? So all these goofs that you've been seeing the president do, it is out of his own sentiments that do not have a backup back home. When he says something that is headed this direction, and what it is that you are expecting home is headed east, how are we going to agree with him?
And it's clearly that there's some level of prematurity in some of these discussions. If at all, yes, there's a discussion about a possible refinery. Then he goes and talks about it in Tanzania. The president there said, we've not discussed this. Then 2 days later, the main investor says, actually, I'm more leaning on Mombasa. What does it mean? Is our president too excited when it comes to diplomatic
You see, Mr. Dangote initially wanted to make that investment in Kenya. That is on record. But due to contract brokerage, he said there is no way he can come to Kenya because of the terms. And that's how he moved to Tanzania. That is also on record. Now, I think our president is trying to renegotiate and endear himself to the deal. So that's a political blunder, because again, you do not stress an investor unnecessarily before the initial phase. at any time at all. Then when they relocate, you realize you are losing more interest and then you want to bring them back. So look at the conversation we are having. How did the president blunder like that? Again, we just sold our KPC. We are talking about refinery. The KPC is a major infrastructure. It's a very strategic project for every country to have. Whether it makes money or not, you need it. We sold ours to Uganda, but we hear there are proxies of the president and other business people in Kenya. So that was a blunder, but I like that Dangote is in town. He should be, or rather, he should be in town for the summit, and maybe there will be a pronouncement from that. We will see. However, the political gaffes you speak of, the president has a tendency of making the wrong choices of words, of commitment, of alliance. Look at the war between Ukraine and Russia. Where did he go? He went to Ukraine. Look at the war between Israel and Palestine. Where did he go? He went to Israel. Look, we have fallen off with South Sudan. We've fallen off with Congo. Now we had a fallout sometime with Tanzania because there's a tiff. Kenyans are not, agreeable to especially the pronouncement of Amri Jeshi Mkuu wa Jirani, Mama Suluhu, who attacked our constitution. I feel personally that the president ought to have stood up for our constitution and pronounced himself that Kenya is different. We are led by a constitution, Article 37, 35, that talks about freedom of expression. He ought to have defended our constitution when Mama Suluhu said, wachapa wao viboko venye natachapa pande hii. So he's been falling off. He had a very good relationship with South Africa for a long time, but his allegiance with Israel, and he knows South Africa is very strong on the Palestinian freedom, also puts us at crossroads. So all this international image of Kenya has been dwindling or tainted since 2022 when the president took over. There are a lot of blunders he has made. We'll have a lot of work to do to salvage our image and improve on our relations. I don't know how his communication departments look like, as my friend says, whether there's any discussion or debriefing or messaging, because it is very key when you go out as a president to understand that you are not speaking from your opinion or your emotions. You are expressing a national position, which you may not agree with. But you have to be very careful what you speak, because you're the symbol. You're the first ambassador of our country. So when you go and misrepresent the larger feelings of our country, that is not good performance.
Yes, it is there on the front page of the Daily Nation. Tanga or Mombasa, the main investor, Nigerian billionaire Aliko Dangote, now says he's looking at Kenya as a site of the 650,000 barrel a day oil refinery. His announcement coming days after Tanga in Tanzania was also touted as a location for the project that he plans to build in East Africa. Mama Samia alisema yeye ajui hiyo maneno. Anyway, meanwhile, President William Ruto is playing host to over 50 leaders of different governments at the Africa Forward Summit, which begins officially today and tomorrow. The summit is bringing together over 30 African heads of states, global institutions and private sector leaders. Government spokesman Isaac Mwaura has said the discussions will focus on investment, innovation, climate financing and reforms to the global financial system. And this meeting comes ahead of France's G7 presidency, which is also expected to boost Kenya's role in shaping Africa's development agenda and attract investment in energy infrastructure and digital technology. This is what is going to be discussed inside. For many people in the city, they're just concerned about the traffic. Harambee Avenue, Parliament Road, City Hall Way, Taifa Road are all closed to traffic. Only those attending the summit at KICC will be allowed access, and they have to have special passes for that. Meanwhile, members of the public have been asked to avoid those areas and obey police directions on where else they can go in as far as access to other